Hello there, this is my local tackle shop. Over the years I've spent a few bob in here, I can tell you. And looking inside, it's easy to see why. Of all the new products that have arrived on the UK market in recent years, continental ground bait and additives have certainly captured the imagination of thousands of British anglers. This Belgian ground bait is made by Marcel van den Eynde, who just so happens to be a very good friend of mine. This whole range of ground baits are designed for a wide variety of fishing styles. Whether you're fishing fast-flowing rivers or very shallow lakes, there is a ground bait which can help you get the best possible results from your swim. On the other hand, if you want to supercharge and boost your ground bait or loose feed, the range offers a wide selection of additives that smell good enough to eat. I'm just off to catch the midnight ferry to spend a day with the Mastermixer himself. With a bit of luck, I'm going to persuade him to part with a few of his secrets and also catch a few fish. I've eventually managed to track down Marcel on his local river, the Eynde, where he's doing a spot of pleasure fishing. Over the last 30 years, he has won just about every conceivable title in Belgium, not to mention his successes in France, Holland and Germany, plus of course the coveted World Championship crown. A closer inspection reveals plenty of activity around the float. That's his ground bait, fizzing and bubbling under the water. The combination of cloud and attractors given off by the mix draws the fish into the swim and induces them to feed. Marcel's wide range of ground baits and additives are readily available in almost every tackle shop in Europe, enabling anglers of all abilities to get the best out of their fishing. But what makes them so good, and why are they so highly respected by the best anglers in the world? The simple answer is that they work. But to understand the reasons why they work so well, it is important to understand a little more about the man himself. In this short documentary, we'll find out what makes him tick, and why they call him the Mastermixer. Most of his time is engaged in competition fishing, but Marcel still enjoys experimenting during training. Here, he is using a common bait on the continent, bloodworm. Nobody knows more about this type of bait than Marcel, and I was keen to see how he collected it. So the next stop is a small drain on the outskirts of the town. Not the best place to collect bloodworm, but with a very heavy schedule lined up for the day, it would do fine. Bloodworm is found in the silt of most lakes and streams, and great care should be taken when wading in unknown waters just to be safe. The best plan, if you are considering collecting your own, is to travel with a friend in case of difficulties. During the summer months, the worm here tends to be a bit sparse, but adequate enough for demonstration purposes. OK, that's enough from me. I'll let Marcel talk you through the procedure.
I've been collecting bloodworm for more years than I care to remember. In the early days, I used to sell any extra worm that I had. This was very good as it paid some way towards my match expenses. During this time, I've travelled thousands of miles collecting in many different countries: Luxembourg, Holland, France and Germany. In fact, I needed a new car every 2 years. As the demand for the bait grew, it became very difficult to keep these places secret, which made things even worse. The system I use consists of a metal framed, fine mesh net, a large circular riddle that allows the silt to pass through but retains the bloodworm, a plastic laundry bowl and a flour sieve. Actually, there's not a lot of washing being done at the moment, and I don't think a lot of baking either. In Belgium we call jokers bloodworm too, so when I say bloodworm I'm referring to both hook and feed bait. Obviously I use the larger worm for the hook, but when the fishing is very difficult I've used joker instead. You would be surprised at the fish this very tiny bait will catch, not only on days when bites are few and far between, but for bigger fish as well. Although there is a plentiful supply today, there are times when this stream would not yield many bloodworms at all, as they would have hatched into their adult stage and flown away, or have been scraped by other people. I'm using the large net to scoop up the silt from at the bottom of the stream. This can be very hard work, especially in winter when the worm goes very deep into the hard silt. I remove the twigs and leaves by hand. This process has to be very thorough, as the worms cling onto it and it becomes very difficult to separate them. You'd be amazed at what turns up in the net sometimes. In fact, a friend of mine scraped up a solid silver trumpet a while ago. I'm still trying to figure out what happened to the fellow who was playing it. It pays to visit your sources on a rotation basis, so that you don't clean them out. The bloodworm I'm collecting today is not the biggest, and I would only normally use it for feed worm, but it should be perfectly adequate for today's experiment. It's important to have several different sources and to try and keep them secret. It's very frustrating to find a good source and someone else comes along and clears the pond or stream out. The less people that know, the more chance you have of a continual supply. Unless they fly away, which happens, and then there's nothing anyone can do. After all the leaves, twigs and trumpets have been removed, I then begin to wash out the silt with a vigorous backwards and forwards motion in the water. Once I'm satisfied that I have taken out the finer particles, I tip the remainder into the round riddle. This is of a bigger mesh, and I have to work quickly to prevent the bloodworm from escaping. As long as the riddle is moving, they cannot escape. And again, when I'm satisfied that I have separated the larger pieces of debris, I'll lift the riddle completely out of the water and allow the contents to dry out very slightly. This only takes a few seconds. I remove the bloodworm from the surface using the flour sieve and put the worms into a collecting bowl which I have attached to my body using a piece of string which prevents it moving with the wind or current. To get a good enough supply for a match, the complete process has to be repeated many times. Well, I've just about got enough bloodworm now, so I will give it one final rinse to make it really neat, and then I'll show you how I store it ready for fishing. It's taken me less than 30 minutes to collect maybe half a kilo of worm. That's not bad going at all. I'm going to wrap them up in newspaper now, but first of all I'll run the excess water off. I know there are many people that store bloodworm in peat, but I've found after years of experimenting with different mediums that the damp leaf mold from beech trees preserves the worm better than anything else. All I do is just gently mix the leaves and worms together before wrapping them up. Look for yourself. There certainly can't be a fish in the world that can resist one of these. Apart from fishing, my other passion is gardening, and with the temperature soaring into the 90s, I've got to check on a few things before I call in at the factory. This will also enable me to show you my artificial joker stream. It's very important that they keep as fresh as possible, so I've created a more or less natural situation for them. Unlike bloodworm, jokers need to be stored in oxygenated water. Tap water works okay, but I prefer to use natural spring water that I pump up from some 30 feet below ground. Provided I keep the water running, the jokers will stay fresh in this setup for at least a week in summer and 3 times as long in winter. I normally take the jokers out of the stream the night before a fishing session, wrap them up in dry newspaper and put them in a fridge. Never put them too near maggots or pinkies. The ammonia damages them. I use the same water to irrigate my garden. I don't trust tap water. It contains too many chemicals. I've always been conscious about the environment, long before everybody jumped on the green bandwagon. This was also one of my main concerns when I first began making ground baits and additives, and it still is as important to me today. I strongly believe in natural products. With the aid of modern science, it's easily possible to imitate flavors and smells using chemicals. These may be convincing to humans, but definitely not to the fish. And nobody knows whether or not it harms them. Chemicals are also much cheaper, but I never compromise the quality of my products by using inferior substitutes. It's the fish that dictate the long-term success of a ground bait or an additive, and I only use the best, even if it costs more. Before I go to the factory, I better feed my fish. I had this pond specially built to study their feeding habits. This has given me an even greater understanding of their behavior, which has proved invaluable when developing new products.
I've asked Marcel to show off some of the trophies he's won over the last 30 years, but while he's setting that up, I've popped into the old factory at Dendermonde, and as always, there's a lot of activity. It's difficult to imagine that when Marcel started mixing his ground baits all those years ago, he did it in the back room of a tackle shop by hand, using a baby bath. Somehow, I don't think his young children were too impressed by this. Nowadays, there's an endless stream of vehicles bringing in tons of raw materials, which are blended together with highly technical machinery. Each ground bait has a different formula to give it the exact texture required. I was amazed to learn that Marcel and his son-in-law Philippe are the only two who know all the formulas. Remarkably, each different ground bait are produced from memory, as they are not written down anywhere. In fact, some of the ingredients are so secret that we are not allowed to film them. Today, continental ground bait is big business, and the Van den Eynde family consider product secrecy a contributing factor to the company's success throughout the world. After the ingredients have been blended, the end products are stored in large silos and then onto the bagging machines. This machine forms, fills and then seals each bag with 1 kilo of ground bait. There are very strict trading standards to observe, and bags are checked at regular intervals on digital scales. Any one bag under 1 kilo and the operation will be stopped and the problem quickly sorted out. After being packed and sealed, 24 per case, they are then put on a pallet ready for storage at the next warehouse. We'll have a look at that a bit later on, but in the meantime, let's see how Marcel's getting on with the trophies.
I'm standing in the office of my old factory, surrounded by a selection of medals and cups that I have won during my career. I'm having a special display room made at my new factory. I've chosen a few of my trophies that are a little bit special to me. Firstly, this small one here I won in 1961 when I became champion of champions in Oost-Vlaanderen, a competition run by the Postal Service where I used to work. This was really the start of my match fishing career. I know a lot of people put it down to beginner's luck, but when I won the Belgium Championships in 1966, a lot of heads started turning. From then, I was accepted by many top anglers. A lot of anglers found out that I was making my own ground baits, and more of them wanted to buy them off me. Of course, my greatest achievement has been winning the individual world championships in Holland in 1971. This has given me and my products international recognition, which has proved very important. Certainly the most valuable trophy is the Belgian Super Cup. It's made from solid silver. I won it 3 years on the trot, which meant I could keep it.
Belgian match rules generally forbid pools and cash prizes, so most top anglers here collect many trophies. However, this is only a small selection of Marcel's. To clean the entire collection takes the best part of 3 days and a lot of elbow grease. I thought I saw Marcel reaching for the silver polish, so I made a sharp exit to the new factory. For the domestic market, the cases are bound and transported on pallets, but for export, huge 20-ton containers are used. Recently finished to cope with enormous increase in demand for Van der Nijn products, this new warehouse will ultimately use all the new production machinery, as well as storing raw materials and finished products. The story doesn't end there, as the company plans to build an even bigger warehouse on the plot next door. This should cope with the increase in demand well into the 21st century. You'll probably be familiar with a couple of the ground baits down here, but some are exclusively manufactured for the continental market. When Marcel's not too busy working or fishing, he spends many hours in his tackle room, and it was there that I caught up with him after lunch, just as he was making up a pole rig for the fishing session we'd hopefully get in before dark.
I'm going to show you how I set up a float rig for pole fishing. This is my favorite type of float, but before I set it up, I'm going to customize it a little. First of all, I trim the length of the stem with a pair of wire cutters. Then, if I can find it, I'll use a small file to remove any sharp edges on the wire that could damage the line. Next, I select some soft silicon tubing. I cut a piece long enough to extend over the wire. This prevents tangles, and there's no need for a second piece. Never use hard float rubbers. This will result in line breakages when altering the depth. Also, the bristle is too long, so I cut down a piece to balance the float. There we have it, the perfect float. Because most of my fishing is done on still waters, I prefer this pattern of float. I use a variety of sizes, from 1/4 of a gram upwards. Lots of anglers like to use a bulk shot or olivette. This is fine for very heavy floats, but I prefer to use style weights whenever practical, because they give me a lot more options when I'm fishing. By sliding them all together, a bulk shot can be achieved. And if the fish start to feed as the bait falls through the water, the style weights can be spread out to give a natural on-the-drop presentation. As I said, I only use olivettes on heavy floats. This means from a gram upwards. Using an olivette is straightforward, but to put styles on the line, I use a special tool called style pincers. They are quite cheap and essential for correct mounting of styles. First, I'm tipping a few styles onto the table. The ones that have landed with the split down, I pick up with the pincers and offer them up to the line. The next step is very important to avoid damaging the line. As the pincers start to close, keep moving the style along the line until you feel a slight pressure. The split should now be closed fully. but should slide easily up and down the line. The process is then repeated until the float has been roughly shotted. That should be enough. A quick check in the water jug and I can tell the float is slightly overshotted. Here's a neat trick to speed things up. I'm going to make some indentations on the bottom stile with a pair of nail clippers. Not too deep, or I will cut the line. Then I start to bend the stile while it's held. This makes the stile very soft and it soon snaps in half and can be pulled off the line. A quick final check in the water jug reveals it's just about spot on. Rather than put a very small stile on, I'm going to reduce the drag on the float like this. It helps break the surface tension and now the float is shotted perfectly.
Kijk, ziet je het verschil? Die dobber die staat perfect. Wat doen we nu? Voor alle zekerheid.
Although I've taken a great deal of care putting the stiles on the line, there still could be a weak spot on it. So I'm going to slide all the stiles past this area and remove the waste. The bottom end of the rig is finished off with a loop for attaching the hook length.
Now down to some serious fishing on the rowing course at Ghent. Marcel will be using bloodworm for this session, but the mixers work equally as well with traditional baits such as casters, maggots and squats. I've decided to challenge Marcel to catch 20 small fish on a light ground bait mix and at least one proper fish on a heavy mix. Here's the snag. I've only given him 30 minutes to do it. He doesn't seem too happy, but sets about the job explaining how he mixes his ground baits for each task.
First, I'm going to put a bit of damp leam on the jokers. This is always really important. I use just enough leam to separate them. It takes the air off them, as we call it, and it makes sure they all sink when throwing them in with the ground bait.
Dan zal hij gemakkelijker zakken natuurlijk. Zo. Dat is heel belangrijk. En nu ga ik een voer maken.
I've already prepared a ground bait for smaller fish.
Eerst
This consists of 1 bag of Super Cup and half a bag of Special. A very light, fluffy mix that will put a good cloud in the water and attract the fish into the peg.
Het braasamvoer klaarmaken.
Now I'm going to show you the correct way to make up a mix. This one is for deep waters containing big fish. First, I add 1 bag of beet and then 1 bag of Turbo Plus. I'll just pop the empty bags in my box out of the way. Please never leave them on the bank.
Het verschil zit er hierin.
The next stage is to blend the two dry ingredients together thoroughly.
Omdat er een klevender voer.
Then, using a sponge, I start adding the water.
Zal het een beetje weer moeten bewerkt worden.
It's better to add small quantities at a time rather than saturate the mix.
Grondig mengen.
Once the water is added, then the work begins. The water must be quickly stirred in to spread it out as evenly as possible. This stage has to be done very carefully and methodically. To get the best results, always use a round bowl. This avoids leaving dry areas.
Het is heel belangrijk, wanneer men de eerste keer er water bij zet, van het grondig te mengen. Zodat alle ingrediënten even veel water opgenomen hebben.
You'll find that after a couple of minutes, the ground bait has dried out a little. Actually, the whole procedure has to be repeated 3 times normally, before the ingredients have absorbed enough water.
Dat begint er nu op te lijken. Maar het kan ook zijn dat er binnen 5 minuten
Well,
terug
that feels
nog wat
about
water
right.
moet aan toegevoegd worden.
When I add the jokers,
Dan ziet
it
er
will be
het
perfect.
verschil tussen die
Here's the
twee
mix I
groenten.
made up earlier.
Het ene is bleek,
As you can
het
see,
andere is
it's
bruiner.
much lighter and
Het is
softer
dus
and breaks
meer.
up as soon as it hits the
Kijk.
water, giving off a lovely cloud.
Het zal meer werkend zijn, dus om kleine vis te lokken. Terwijl dit hier zal, en dat mag ongeveer nog een minuutje of
In
5.
contrast, the heavy
Blijven
mix
staan.
will go
Oh.
straight down to the bottom before
Dat moet je
breaking
even
open.
zetten.
When fishing for big fish, I like to add the jokers to the ground bait about
Hier,
5
de
minutes
helft van de
before
pak
I
vijf
throw it
zal ik
in.
erbij doen.
This will make the jokers less active.
En terug grondig mengen.
It normally takes some time for bigger fish to respond to a heavy ground bait approach. For this reason, it is best to put the heavy mix in one
Nu kunnen we
initial
ongeveer nog
bombardment.
5 minuutjes wachten.
It's important to be as accurate as possible, so I set up my pole and use the tip as a marker. A 2 kilo mix of ground bait with the jokers will be sufficient to provide 10 portions approximately the size of your English cricket balls. I am a little bit worried about this challenge as the conditions are far from perfect. It's red hot and it's flat calm. Well, I can only do my best. All right,
Nu ga ik met een...
let's get on with the fishing.
Het is maar alleen
I'm going to try and catch some small fish now.
van allemaal op dezelfde.
Fishing this way, it's vital to keep the jokers as lively as possible. The ground bait is used little and often, all the time adding a few fresh jokers that I've kept in the newspaper. Again, accuracy is very important.
Mag ik dan geen opmerking geven dat het hier niet gaat?
While I try and build up the swim, you might be interested in how I first became involved in fishing. When I was a schoolboy, I was always interested in natural things, animals, plants and birds.
Dat ik als mijn
In
zoon
fact, all I used to do was spend my free time in the fields and woods, learning about nature.
omdat iedereen dat wel zo
There was a
wilde.
small stream that I had to pass on my way to
En dan
school,
kon ik de slag
and I
doen,
used to
slag
spend a lot of
zaterdag, omdat
time
ik wist
watching the fish in it.
dat de volgende week
They
mijn
fascinated
naam
me.
misschien in het dagblad zou staan.
One day, some friends from another class had a free afternoon and told me they were going fishing. I liked the sound of the
Ik denk
idea
dat dat ook een van
and
mijn
told my
grootste
mother
vragen
that
is.
I had also got a free afternoon, which was not true, and I went fishing with them.
Ik heb er heel veel plezier aan beleefd. aan die
I didn't
eerste
catch very much, except I now knew how I wanted to spend all my time, and I played truant a few more occasions. Eventually, as you might guess, my parents found out that I had lied to them, and I got into trouble. But by now, school was real torture for me, and I really hated going there when there were fish to be caught. In an effort to get me back to my schoolwork, my parents offered me fishing tackle if I got good results in my exams. This did the trick, and it encouraged me to take my schooling more seriously, if not for the right reasons. I must be honest, I was not a very good angler in those days, as I had no one to give me any guidance. It was only when the river Eynde got polluted that I started to fish a local lake. This later got taken over by a small club, and you had to become a member to fish there. This was quite expensive, and my parents offered me membership to the club if I worked really hard at my studies. Well, they'd certainly got me sorted out, because I got my membership after the term had ended, and I was very happy. In that club, there were some very good anglers. I would always ask them questions, and everything they told me, I tried and tested. Although, on the very first match I entered, I didn't catch a fish.
Allemaal goede namen.
I was bitterly
Ik ben eerst een
disappointed.
rapus gaan drinken, om een beetje kalm te blijven.
Luckily for me, the better anglers came to my rescue and pointed me in the right
Ik
direction.
won met een
Hold
grandioze
on.
voorsprong natuurlijk.
Yes. My first fish of the day. A small roach. Hopefully they're moving in onto my ground bait now. Let's have another go.
Kleine visjes.
Another bloodworm on. And straight out again.
Ik heb nogthans al enige platjes gevangen.
Keep a bit of ground bait going in all the time.
Zitten er nu.
And there's another one. I'm on the road
Kijk, dat zijn
now.
die platjes.
A little skimmer this
Ja,
time.
het zijn kleintjes, maar
I feel a bit more confident now.
helaas zullen ze toch
It's looking
komen,
good.
geloof ik.
The challenge is on. Well, I've done my bit on the small fish. Now the biggest problem, catching the bream. I've baited the hook with 4 bloodworms and I'm fishing well over depth at 11 meters to drop a shot lying on the bottom. This is the best method for catching bream. Yes. Well, I thought I got one there, but it proves a small fish. Not a very good sign at all. Anyway, before the fish arrived, I was talking about the early days of my fishing career. I think that it's fair to say that I was very headstrong when I was a youngster. I thought that I knew it all. But judging by my results, I quite obviously didn't. For me, club fishing was the catalyst that enabled me to become a successful match angler. When I started work in the post office, I worked shifts. This meant I could devote more time to my fishing. As you already know, I started collecting bloodworm and selling it to other anglers. How on earth did I ever miss that bite? It looks as though the bait is untouched, so it can only have been a line bite. At least that proves there are bigger fish arriving into the swim. I'm going to put the float way over depth now. That's the way I should get them. I've got all the weight on the bottom. I'm very confident that I'll catch a better fish now. It might not look very sensitive, but it can be a brilliant method for bream. When they are feeding, there's no mistake in the bites, and it's virtually impossible to miss them.
Ja. En erachterheen.
That's more like it. Putting on the extra depth has certainly made all the difference. The way the elastic is stretching, it feels like a bream. Although I've got 20 minutes of the session left, and I'm convinced there are a lot of fish on my ground bait, I'll take my time and ensure I land it. It is a bream, about 2 pounds I guess. To be perfectly honest, conditions have been very hard. The venue is not fishing at all well this afternoon, and the anglers around me have been really struggling for a bite.
Struggling's the word. I'm not quite sure, but I think that was Flemish from as sick as a parrot. Marcel has risen to the challenge with flying colours and 10 minutes to spare. He could have actually caught twice as many small fish and a few more bream in the time allocated. To be honest, I never saw another angler catch a fish all afternoon. And this one certainly looks fed up. Perhaps he's not used the right ground bait. Who knows? I guess the fish are the best judges of that one. Having already made his point, Marcel decided to have one more cast to see if he could find another bream and prove that the first one wasn't just a fluke. The float has barely settled, and another sail away bite signals the arrival of yet another hungry bream. Up until a couple of years ago, most Belgium anglers use flick tips for all their pole fishing, but nowadays Marcel prefers to use an internal elastic system like the English use, especially when bream are the main quarry. It was during the 1990 European Super Cup at Home Pierpont that he realised the limitations of flick tips, as gale force winds lashed the venue and he lost many good bream. It definitely pays to take a little extra time when you're playing the bigger fish, even on elastic, as there's no point in losing a good fish after all the hard work has been done. It's a lovely fish, just over 2 pounds in weight, nice and easy into the landing net and safety. It's given me a great deal of satisfaction following Marcel around all day, but I think this is the highlight. He fishes in such an effortless manner, it's almost like second nature. Look at that for a cracking fish. I can't think of a better ending to a most enjoyable day. Now it's time to return the fish and to head off home. A brilliant display really, when you consider the very hard conditions and with all the commotion going off on the bank. A truly first-class performance. The reputation of Marcel van den Eynde and his products is held in the highest esteem by the world's top matchmen and pleasure fishermen alike. In his typical modest style, Marcel prefers to let his results do the talking, and his ground bait provide fishermen worldwide with improved catches and a greater enjoyment of their sport. If you've never tried any of his products, maybe it's about time you did.